between 1929 and the late 1930s. The Great Depression is believed to have three main causes: uneven distribution of wealth, decreasing demand for goods, and overproduction. The working class didn't have enough money needed to buy goods, while factories and farms began to foreclose. As a result of this, there was a major cutback on the goods produced. The Great Depression affected many people. Thousands went homeless and others were forced into shantyvilles or shack towns. Many people lost trust in the government and believed nothing was being done to fix the poor economic state. One of the leading factors of the Great Depression was the stock market crash of 1929. People bought stocks on the margin, which meant they were putting a small down payment on the stock and then repaying the rest later. Soon citizens began to doubt the system and tons of stocks were sold suddenly, leading to the stock market crash. The stock market crash started a domino effect, which led to a global depression. The U.S. system crashed, and the United States pulled investments out of European banks. This caused many issues, and each country was in its own way. After the war, Europe was left destroyed and in a tough economic state. Britain tried to improve its economy by creating high tariffs and increasing taxes, as well as increasing regulation on currency to prevent inflation. After the war, Germany was probably in the worst economic state of all. Germany was left with hefty war reparations as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. Unlike Britain, Germany didn't regulate their currency well enough. Specifically, they printed more money and caused a massive inflation. France increased worker pay and benefits to help fight unemployment, but despite their changes, unemployment rate. Japan's agricultural system was hurt more by the global depression than anything. Their silk exports dropped significantly. Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 1932, and he implemented the well-known New Deal program to help save the economic system. The New Deal program focused on the 3 R's ideas: relief, recovery, and reform. With his first New Deal, he implemented new programs such as the FDIC and Civilian Conservation Corps to help better the economic system. In his second term, he came back with even more programs that he put in place to help the people. Also, with FDR's presidency came other changes. There was an increase in Democratic support amongst minority groups, as well as a big morale boost in the American people. For the first time in a while, Americans wanted to be independent and try and solve their own problems. The Treaty of Versailles was one of the peace treaties put in place after World War I. It ended the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers. It also left Germany with most, if not all, of the war reparations. This created a ton of hostility in Germany, and ultimately led to fascism in Germany as well as World War II. Hitler and Mussolini were the main leaders of fascism in Germany. They threatened many nations and invaded others like the Rhineland and Ethiopia. At this point in time, America remained isolated from these activities, while Britain and France tried to negotiate with Hitler. Britain and France even came to Russia for help, but they had signed a non-aggression act with Germany. Soon after the German invasion of Poland, World War II began. World War II began in 1939 and ended in 1945. The battlegrounds of World War II included the European theater and the Pacific theater. The European theater included most of Europe except Spain. The Pacific theater consisted of Japan, the Philippines, and various battles by sea. Many different technologies were used in World War II, some of which had never been seen before. Warfare included tanks, planes, battleships, as well as new weapons such as the atomic bomb. A major turning point in the European theater was the Battle of Stalingrad. It was a major Soviet Union, as well as a big morale boost. This battle also marked the last territory gain for the Axis powers. In the Pacific theater, a major turning point was the Battle of Midway, where the United States defeated the Japanese Navy. The United States started out very isolated, then over time they began to support the Allied powers. With the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States became fully involved in the war. As a result of America entering the war, there were a lot of changes, one of those being the increased involvement of women in assembly line type jobs as well as war zone related jobs. Also, African Americans were changed by the involvement in the war. They began working in factories and held military positions. One of the most well-known groups of pilots from the war, these were the first African American aviators out of all the armed forces. Japanese people were put under a lot of prejudice during the war as a result of the acts of Pearl Harbor. Many Japanese people in the United States, especially along the West Coast, were put in internment camps and separated from general population. The first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6, 1945. The United States had called for Japan's surrender with no reply. This supposedly led to the bombings. Soon after the first bomb was dropped, another was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. After the second bomb was dropped, Japan surrendered and a treaty was finally signed. This ended World War II. As a result of World War II, the actions of the Nazis were finally brought to the surface. The world finally knew about the concentration camps and the wrongdoings against the Jewish people. The Jewish finally had an area to call their own, and they were given Israel in 1947. Also, with World War II over, the United Nations was formed to maintain peace and keep good relations around the world. The United Nations is still in use today. Finally, the Cold War began after the ending of World War II. It was caused by the tensions between the U.S. and Communist Soviet